أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بفضل الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. O ye who believe, it has been written upon you as it has been written upon the people before you, the fast or to fast. Perhaps that you may have piety and wariness of Allah. Sadaqallahu al-Ali al-Azim. Nobody likes to be dirty. Nobody likes to be considered as dirty. Nobody likes the feeling of being dirty. Everybody likes cleanliness. Everybody likes to feel clean and to be clean. In fact, sometimes you might go through a situation in life where for a certain purpose you are unable to have a shower for a while. And you feel it. Sometimes you might be on a long fishing trip or a long camping trip and there's nowhere where you can take a proper shower. You start to feel pretty bad about yourself on the outside. Or sometimes maybe in Hajj, in the heat, and in some circumstances you feel like you wish you could just rip your skin off because there's that much muck and sweat and gunk that's on you. That nobody likes to have that feeling and everybody likes to have cleanliness. In the same manner, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written upon us to fast so we may attain what is known as taqwa. And this taqwa is better pronounced in the sermon of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam introducing the holy month, Shahr Ramadan. At the end of it, Imam Ali alayhi salam asks him, he says to him, Ya Rasulullah, what is the best of deeds in this month? And he says to him, Al-wara' an maharimillah. That for you to be or abstain from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told you to abstain from. This abstinence in the form of wara' is an abstinence that's further than just keeping away from the sin. It's more than that. It's keeping away from any action that leads towards the sin. It's keeping away from the actions that lead towards that sin. The Holy Prophet says to Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says, Ya Ali, he says, ثلاث من لم تكن فيه لم يقم له عمل. There is three things. And if you don't have these three things, then none of your deeds are validated and none of your deeds are done. So he says these three things are wara'un yahjuzahu an ma'asillah. That the first one is for you to have wara', to have this capability. Wara' is derived, this same word is similar to the word of taqwa. In fact, the word wara', or if we say it about a person, someone who is cowardly is someone who has wara'. Why? Because he fears what's ahead of him, he doesn't want to get hurt. In the same way that someone who fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has this level of wara'. Similar to taqwa. Taqwa is to be wary of Allah. That you're wary that this creator that created you, that can make and break you in an instant, thus you have that fear and that respect of his status. And so you are wary that I best be wary of the next step that I take. This is basically where the word wara' comes from. And so he says that there are three things. One of them is that you need to have wara', you need to have this fear and ability and piety to keep away from bad deeds. He says number two, he says you need to have wa khuluqun yudari bihi an-nas wa hilmun yaruddu bihi jahl al-jahilin. So he says, or jahl al-jahil. He says that the three things you need to have, number one is wara'. So you need to have this ability, this faculty This faculty of taqwa that allows you to abstain from the sins of Allah, or this faculty of wara'. Number 2 is for you to have a good disposition, to be able to deal with people. For you to be able to be good with people, this akhlaq. And he says number 3 is for you to have a level of clemency and forbearance, that if an ignorant person was to talk to you, or an ignorant person was to deal with you, to keep away his ignorance from harming you. That if someone's ignorant, obviously there's a way and a manner in which you deal with them. وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. So we get back to the first point. The first point is the Prophet says, the most important thing in this month, and the most important thing you need for all of your deeds, is for you to have wara', for you to have this abstinence from the sins, or you to have abstinence from the acts of disobedience from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. First and foremost, the thing we need to work on is for somebody to not think of sin. When we look at a normal sinful act, and with the introduction I spoke about, people don't like naturally to feel dirty. People don't like to feel, they would rather feel clean. In the same manner, when you commit an act of disobedience, your soul in essence, or your insides, feel dirty. The example of walking through a shopping center, or walking through a street, or going for a drive, or working, or wherever you are, and up comes and walks by a lady that's scantily dressed, or a man that's scantily dressed. And so at that moment you feel like you need to look. The people around you might encourage you to look. She's passing by, she's almost gone, look. If you look, there's a degree of pleasure. If you look, there's a small degree of pleasure. But the second that pleasure finishes, you feel dirty. You feel disgusting. You feel low. You feel lowly because you dropped your guard and you looked for that small amount of pleasure and it wasn't worth anything. Specifically, if you're worried about your faith, if it is in the holy month of Ramadan, and you do this and you feel that I've been building my faith for this whole month, and that one look, it's like it destroyed everything. However, if you don't look, and if you lower your gaze, the second that person passes and you lowered your gaze and you didn't look, you feel a sense of accomplishment. You feel a sense of pride. You feel dignified. You feel respectful. And this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed within us. This is what's known as the fitrah. The fitrah that Allah fatara an-nasa alayha. This fitrah, or this inherent quality that Allah has given us within ourselves to already understand good from bad, to see good from bad, and the instantaneous reward in Allah sari'ul hisab, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is quick to accounting. He shows us that with these actions, immediately you feel the plus or you feel the minus of that action. That immediately you feel it. So when you do that good action, you feel it and you love it and you feel that respect. When you do that bad action, immediately you feel that disgust and you feel that filth and you feel like you've done something wrong. And this is why you notice when we look towards sin and you look at anyone that commits sin, Muslim or non-Muslim, that have this inherent ability, you see that people who continually sin and people who fall into this sin, they have that negative feeling within them. They feel ugly on the inside. It feels terrible on the inside. In fact, it feels dirty. And it feels like you can't clean that dirt. This is why certain sins, they have support groups. Specifically the sin of homosexuality. They have so many support groups. They have so many pride days. They have pride weeks. They have Mardi Gras parties. They have whatever they can to sort of lift their spirits again. Why? Because from deep down on the inside, if they still have a bit of heart, they're sinful and they feel that sin. They feel it. And this is why they try and counter it in that manner. And believe me, I'm not talking from my own pocket. Go and look at this, have a look at the statistics. And have a look at the statistics of the coherence between mental illnesses, for example, and mental illness and homosexuality, psychological illnesses. and homosexuality. And you will see that there is a great correlation between the two. Why? Because within them, they feel that difficulty. But this is just one aspect. Similar to every other sinner. From what it comes in from within them, they feel that filth and they need, or they have the need to clean this filth. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to not even to think of sin. The example of thinking of sin is like a house that's on fire. If you think of sin, imagine a fire gets started in your house and it gets put out. The smoke of that fire will blacken the house. There'll be soot everywhere. If anyone's ever had a fire in the kitchen or something like that, I'm sure you can relate to this. And once you put the fire out, there's soot everywhere. So it blackens the house. In the same way, you thinking of sin, it blackens your mind, it blackens your heart. Someone who commits the sin, it's like setting the house on fire. That the fire begins to burn through it and to eat through it. And this is why it's incumbent upon us to take that first step and to stop ourselves from even thinking of sin. To stop ourselves from even imagining sin. And this is the issue. A lot of the time, we don't want to think of sin. We don't want to imagine sin. Yet we create an environment, an area that we sit in that allows us to fall into this sin. One of the core things, other than not thinking of sin, and sometimes your thoughts, you can't control them. You get a thought there. But know this. It's funny how in certain environments, and when you are continually in a certain environment, you'll have certain thoughts. And in a different environment, you'll have other thoughts. Controlling your thoughts is something that's very difficult, but the point is that you have to stop of even thinking of that in order for you to achieve this wara, this abstinence, and being away from sin. Number 2 is to avoid the environment of sin. Now, a lot of the time when we get these ideas or we get these thoughts, it's based on the environments that we sit in. It's based on what we surround ourselves with. When we're consistently on these applications that we've mentioned so many a time, and these apps that you download, and these apps that just show random things, something that you're not even looking for, and then it pops up, and it comes up. Once you've seen that image, it's very hard to unsee that image. And once you see that image, it takes you further and further. Once you see that image, you start to think of ideas. You start to get these thoughts. Iblis, the whole time, that's what he's doing. He's just waiting. He's waiting for that window to open for you to drop your guard. Once you drop your guard, he rushes in. And this is why Imam Ali alayhi salam, he puts it in that manner. He's got this beautiful saying, as all of his sayings are beautiful, obviously, because it's knowledge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where he speaks about the stages of somebody losing their wara. So he says that man kathura kalamahu kathura khata'u. Whoever speaks much, he makes many errors. So the more you speak, the more errors you make. And whoever makes much errors, qalla haya, that his modesty or his shame is reduced. Sayyid last night was speaking all about shame. So I had to say, if whoever understood the Arabic, he was speaking about haya and modesty, and this is very important. Once that modesty drops, that haya drops, the window opens. وَمَنْ قَلَّ حَيَاءَهُ قَلَّ وَرَعُ. Whoever's haya is reduced, his wara', his ability to abstain from sin is reduced. وَمَنْ قَلَّ وَرَعَهُ مَاتَ قَلْبُهُ وَمَنْ مَاتَ قَلْبَهُ دَخَلَ النَّارِ. So it begins with you reducing the shame by speaking too much in this instance. However, the stages are the shame gets reduced. Once the shame gets reduced, the abstinence gets reduced. Once the abstinence gets reduced, the heart begins to die. Once the heart begins to die, it doesn't matter what somebody says to you, or what you hear, or what you see. You don't feel it anymore. It doesn't matter. You can't take that advice and you can't wear that advice anymore, because it's been taken away from you. And this is why you have to be extremely careful with the environment that you place yourself in. Look at our lives, for example, and your soul feels it, and I'll show you, inshallah. I'll give you an example for the sisters, and this example is specifically for the sisters and the brothers, but mainly for the sisters. With the sisters, you want to go sit in a gathering with some of your friends, or you want to go out with some of your friends. So you go out with your friends, what is it that you speak about? You go out, you speak about other people, but these days you don't even have to go out, you can just put messages, private message this and private message that. Private messages back and forth, and you could be speaking about everybody that's around you. But you go out, you go to have a coffee, all you're doing is you're speaking about everybody that's around you. Not discussing about ideas, not discussing anything spiritual, but discussing other things, basically doing backbiting, ghiba, making up stories, taking suspicions to the next level, turning suspicions into accusations. And you continually do this, but how do you feel when you finish? You know that feeling where you want to say something and you know it's ghiba. In your head you're saying, I shouldn't say this. I shouldn't say this about this person. This is backbiting. This is clearly backbiting. And then you say to yourself, no, I want to say it. I'm going to say it. You then say it and you don't get the desired reaction. You thought the other person was going to be shocked. But rather than being shocked, they're just like, yeah, damn, I went through this sin to create some entertainment in the gathering. And the entertainment didn't come in the gathering. So you've lost it. Not only that, this applies the same for the men. When the men go and hang out, you go and have a sahra, for example, the shabab, the boys, or even the men. If you sit down and you're just chatting, for the shabab, you're going to be chatting about one topic and one topic only, especially if you're single. And you chat about this topic all night. And this is all you're speaking about. When you leave, how do you feel, honestly? You get back home and you're like, what was I doing? What a waste of a night. Terrible. Your soul feels that way. In the same way, but you know, if you sit down and you have a religious discussion, for example, you learn something new about your faith. Or if, la'allahu, and it's rare, you read Hadith al-Kisab, for example, at the beginning of it. Or you have a gathering where you have done something religious, it feels different. You go home and your soul feels happy. Inside you feel good. Inside you feel clean. This is something that's extremely important, and I just want to bring a very important point here. There's a core difference. A core difference between divine legislation or divine guidance, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sets the rules of Islam, and judicial legislation or standard legislation that we see in our lives. And that is, when we look at the way Islamic laws are done, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He teaches us to not even go next to something that's sinful. وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا, for example. Alright? Or He says, you know, اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن. So be away from this. Avoid this. Right? Rather than saying don't do this. Whereas when we look at the regular judicial system, it's this thing is a crime. You can't do it. For example, crossing a red light is a crime. Drink driving is a crime. But if you want to have a drink, drink responsibly. You want to have a drink, have a plan B. Islam looks at where is that drink going to lead. It doesn't look at the actual crime. Before the crime, it says this is going to lead that, so do not go next to al-khamr, for example. Zina is going to lead to the destruction of a family. Zina is going to lead to murder. Zina is going to lead to whatever it leads to, so do not even go next to it. This is how Islam is, so it sets you way back. That before you get there, why? Because the world that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created is very precise. Everything links into each other. You ever heard the example that if you throw a pin into the ocean, that the ocean will rise the degree, or sorry, the amount, the volume of that pin that you threw into the ocean. True or not true? 100% true. Scientifically speaking, that's what will happen. And if you remove a pebble from the ocean, that's how much volume you will reduce from the ocean. This is like the world. The whole world, the whole khalq is created like this. And you hear this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us hints of this in certain traditions. One tradition where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends down the angels to take from the earth. He says, bring me some clay so I can create Nabi Adam alayhi salam. And so when he comes down, the earth refuses. And the angels say, why do you refuse? The earth says, I refuse of my clay to become a human that will then disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be burnt in the fire of hell. No thank you. So there is these divine calculations, these specific calculations with every action that you do. There are consequences. There is a recompense. If we have a look back to the judicial legislation, I'll give you another example, because we look at the divine legislation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the divine laws, He stops you way before. Do not go next to zina. In other words, do not even go next to the things that take you towards zina. And this is why we have certain laws in Islam. For example, And people may look at them and think, this is, this is taking it a bit too far. And this in itself is a sin of the mind, because ultimately Islam looks at how bad the final outcome will be, and this is why they're very serious about it. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very serious about it. With certain crimes we see in common law, there's a serious consequence, but the build up to it, they don't say anything about it. They don't stop you before. So when we look in common law, the majority of Sydney City is an alcohol-free zone, if anyone knows this. You're not allowed to drink alcohol in the street. Most Muslims wouldn't know this because they've never come across that problem. And this is why, you notice the way that they solved this, that they said no one can drink, but the problem is every time someone is drinking in the street, we're going to have to fine them or we're going to have to arrest them. And this is something in the Western world, the way they solved it, they said, okay, when you buy an alcoholic beverage, that's why they give them a brown paper bag. Have the brown paper bag, that way the police just looks at it and says, I don't know what's in that brown paper bag, and the guy can continue drinking and that's it. The problem is solved. That's what they think. The problem is solved in terms of them handing out fines or arresting people. But the problem of the alcohol still exists. With Islam, it's completely different. With Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forewarns and forewarns, and before we even get to the haram, there's 1,000 makruhs. For example, it's haram for you to be in an absent space, in a confined space, or a space where there's nobody else with a foreign woman. So you can't be in a place with a foreign woman, according to most maraja, in most places. And there's, refer to your marja, but even for example being in a car alone somewhere that's secluded with a foreign woman, this is something that's haram. And a woman that's not halal on you. Or for example, according to one of the maraja, or some of the maraja, you can't even enter a lift with a foreign woman, even though it's for a short period of time. To be in that, just you and her in that lift, and that lift gets taken, and you and her are alone for that short period of time, this is not allowed. It is makruh to sit in the place that a woman was sitting before you. It is not allowed, according to the ahadith, for you to listen to the breathing of a woman. You are not allowed, and specifically for the women, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَخْضَعْنَا فِي الْقَوْلِ, that He says, do not soften your voices when you speak. And this is something that's common with the sisters, so common with women, that when they speak to foreign men, their voice becomes soft and different. It's been mentioned before, that all of a sudden, the voice that comes on is what they call the curiously confused voice. You know, oh, how much does this cost? You know, I can't put on a good woman's voice. But they put on that curiously confused voice. And then the man gets so happy that when she says, how much does this cost? He says, oh, darling, because you touched it, $100. But I'll give it to you for $5. For example. This is what happens. This in itself is an interaction that's borderline haram. An interaction that shouldn't take place. An interaction that can't take place. All of a sudden, as I like to call it, she loses her take out the rubbish voice, and the other voice, the curiously confused voice, comes on. She's able to speak like that. And men do a similar thing when it comes towards the voice. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts all of these things beforehand. Why? Because of the outcome, the resultant of that sort of a sin, like zina, for example, or any sin, has consequences that may go on for hundreds of years. They may be eternal consequences. These consequences may continue. This is why it is so dangerous, and this is why we have to try with every effort to have this precaution. Inshallah, there's a few more points I want to talk about, but we've run out of time. But let me finish off with just a small story. And this story covers a lot of factors regarding this abstinence from sin. But it's an interesting story. This is a story of someone who was a abid from Banu Israel. And this abid, he was a person, abid is somebody that basically is like a monk. So he takes his life, he sits aside and he just worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's all he does. And so this man used to worship so much that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the gift of being mustajab ad-da'wah. So when he prays to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah accepts his dua and gives him what it is that he wants immediately. People knew him from all around the world. from all around the land, and they would go and visit him. This is at the time of Banu Israel, obviously, so we're talking thousands of years ago. And people would come and find him. I mean, even today, you find it's a common thing. It's, for example, it's mustahab to do your own khira, but people like to call up, for example, Alim Deen and say, please do a khira for me. I want you to do the khira because you seem to be someone that's closer to God. Me, I've just been doing this and this, so you do it, maybe I'll get a better answer. Or you do dua for me. It's good to ask other people to do dua for you. It's very mustahab because of this. So this man was known. One day, in the middle of the night, these two brothers come knocking on his door and they have their sister with them. Their sister is someone that's very ill. Something's wrong with her. I think she had some sort of mental illness. The point is, she was so ill, they said to him, please, we want you to do dua for her. Keep her the night and do dua for her so she can become better. And then we'll come and get her tomorrow morning. So immediately he said, no. She's a foreign woman, I'm not letting her into here. They start to beg him, please, come on, she's sick. We need to go somewhere else. We need to pick her up tomorrow if you can do this, and she'll be cured by the next day. So eventually they convince him, and he says to himself, Iblis gives him some ideas that, she's somebody that's, she's mentally challenged, she's sick. What's the problem with keeping her in my house? For one night, I'll do dua during that night. Once I finish, they'll come tomorrow and they'll take her. So he takes her into the house, begins to pray, does the dua, she gets cured. And they're alone. And this is the biggest problem. Because when you're alone, and this is what the Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he talks about dhikrullah. And he talks about dhikr, remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says that it's subhanallah, walhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar. He says, but this is not the dhikr that I am referring to when he speaks about dhikr. He says, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you are alone. Because this is the time that it counts. When you are with people around you, when you're with everyone around you, it's another story. In fact, many of us have a certain outside personality and an inside personality. And this is why one of the things, to really get to know someone, you have to get to know their family and the people who are most intimate with them. These people that are intimate with them will give you the best bearing or scale of how this person is. It was once said that if you want to see if a man is a good man, have a look if his wife looks up to him and his children look up to him. This will give you a good idea of what he's really like inside. Now, that's not always the case, but it's a good litmus test. It really is a good litmus test. You know how some people, for example, I'm not talking about a bad kid, but someone who doesn't trust their father, doesn't, my father, it's another story from my father, or it's another, this is bad. To give your children that sort of image, that they lose trust and lose faith in who you are. Why? Because there's an image of you in the outside world, and then there's a different image in the house. You might be this pious man in the outside world and a tyrant within the house. So we come back to the story. He's alone with her in the house. He does dua. She's been cured all of a sudden, mentally challenged. Looks like challenge accepted. So he has a look and he says, she's pretty, she's nice, but I won't do anything. I'm pious. Shaitan's like, who's going to know? You know, she was sick. No, it doesn't matter what she says. As long as she's cured, the people will be happy. So the shaitan keeps throwing ideas until he falls. And this is one of the hardest things. You know, in Surah Yusuf, when it was mentioned about وَلَقَدْ هَمَّتْ بِهِ وَهَمَّ بِهَا, this is one of the most difficult things. For this to happen, and it rarely happens to anyone, obviously, but something like this, in this situation, like the way it happened to Nabi Yusuf, they ask one of the ulama, that what would you do if you fell, and they say this alim, he was a marja, he was someone very pious. What would you do if you fell in that situation, that you were alone, there's just you and there's this, you know, Zulaykha. And he says, I pray to Allah, I'm never put in that situation. It's something that's really difficult. So anyway, he goes ahead and he does what he does. He falls onto that action, and then once he finishes, he realizes that she's cured now. She'll be able to tell them what I've done. And once she tells them what I've done, I'll lose everything. I lose my status. I'm someone that's a abid. They know me as someone that's worshipful. They know me as someone that's close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it keeps playing over in his head. Obviously the girl's shocked. She's just come into good health, and then she's been assaulted by this man. So then he decides the best thing for me to do is to kill her. Silence her and finish everything. Talking about despair yesterday, this is basically despair. So he kills her. Once he kills her, he says, now I have to hide the body. What do? He goes and he buries her. He hides the body, he buries her. He says, when they come the next day, I'll just say they don't know what they're talking about. They're trying to make an accusation against me. Who are they going to believe? The monk or, two random travelers that have just come from who knows where. And so they come the next day for their sister. He says she was never here, tries to make up a story. And then in one narration, it says that the devil comes and says, I saw him burying the body. Comes in the form of a man, this devil who's been telling him the whole time what to do. He then tells him, I saw where they buried the body. He points him and leads him to the direction of where the body is buried. They go and follow, they find where the body is buried. So they call the local enforcement. The local enforcement arrests him. They find the body, their sister's been assaulted and killed. And then they take him away to be judged. He goes away to be judged. They sentence him to death for the act that he has done. And so ultimately they take him and they strap him up to hang him. And he's up there on the gallows, rope is around his neck. He's about to be hung. And during this moment he realizes that that's it, he's lost everything. This guy was somebody whom Allah accepts his dua. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may have had mercy on him had he asked, or would have had mercy on him. The mercy of Allah is too great. However, instead he saw Iblis. Iblis came to him and said to him, listen, do you want me to save you from this? I can save you from everything. Mind you, Iblis had been telling him from the beginning, I'll save you from everything. Do this, I'll save you from it. Hide the body, I'll save you from it. He gets to that point, would you like to be saved from everything? He says, yes. He says, then just accept me. Accept me as your God and I'll save you as everything. Become one of my servants. And he have complete disregard for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, but I'm tied up and there's a noose around my neck. How do I do it? Prostrate to me. And he just prostrate. He says, I can't, I'm tied up, everything. He says to him, just blink, that's enough. And he blinks, the floor falls beneath him. And he gets hung, dead, sold everything. From what? One small action. I swear, my brothers and sisters, if you were to look into these sorts of crimes and the way they begin, you'll be shocked at how simple the way is that they begin. Honest to God, you will be shocked at how simple and small the man finds that attraction and it ends up into a grievous crime. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about wara and having that degree of abstinence. Inshallah, tomorrow there's a few more important points that I wanted to go over, but I've gone way over time by about 5 minutes. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll speak more about wara and how to attain this wara, this abstinence, and create this barrier between us and sin. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of our holy Imam, Mashallah Farajul Sharif. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy on our dead, to cure our sick. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to fulfill our debts and to accept our deeds and to give us this faculty of wara' and taqwa and abstinence from sin. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة وأهدى ثوابها إلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات تصبح الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد